By the time I understood I was being watched, I had already gotten used to surviving in pieces. I knew Owen's kind of attention. It pressed too hard. It arrived like a bruise before the hand. It lingered outside windows, inside apologies, in the slow drag of footsteps behind me after midnight. Men like him never believed a door was really closed. They only believed they had not opened it again yet. What I did not know was that another man had been following the empty space beside me. He watched the alley behind Belladonna, where I dumped flour sacks and stale bread. He watched the corner where I checked for reflections in dark shop glass before turning home. He watched the second-floor window of my apartment where I kept the light off and still stood too long sometimes, listening for a voice I had already left. He never called my name. He never came close enough for me to feel safe. He only stayed there, somewhere beyond the street lamps, like a promise made in a language I did not speak. And the first night my past finally reached for me again, the man in the dark stepped out of it. I should have run. Instead, I told him to shut the door before he ruined my bread. And that was the moment my life stopped belonging to me in the way it had before. Chapter 1. The door he did not close, Belladonna, belonged to men who spoke softly and made everybody else lower their voices. I knew that without knowing names. You learned things in restaurant kitchens the way dough learned heat. By surviving it. The servers went quiet when certain black cars stopped outside. The managers stood straighter. Delivery men became polite in the frightened, over-careful way people got when they thought a wrong glance could cost them teeth. I worked pastry in the back, where sugar made more sense than people. At midnight, the dining room glittered with cut crystal and low jazz. But in the kitchen, the only things that mattered were timing, texture, and the fact that bread was living. You could not bully it into rising. You had to earn its trust. That night, the sourdough had finally reached the right elasticity under my palms when the back door opened and let in a stripe of winter air. No one spoke, not the line cooks. Not Dario on grill, who swore through grease burns and payroll mistakes and once threw a broken finger. Not Chef Bia, who could reduce a dishwasher to tears with one lifted eyebrow. The room just stopped. I kept kneading. My hands were white to the wrists, flour packed soft into the lines of my skin. The dough pushed back, warm and alive, while cold air dragged across the table. "Close the door," I said, not looking up. "If the draft hits this again, it dies." Silence thickened. Then a man's voice, low and calm as dark water, said, "Does it?" I glanced up because there was something wrong with the room and found every pair of eyes turned not to me, but to him. He stood in the doorway in a black overcoat, one hand still on the metal handle. Tall, broad-shouldered. No rush in him anywhere. Men moved around him, like they had already learned what happened when he was made to wait. His face would have been beautiful if it had not been so still. There was a pale scar cut into his chin. His tie was perfect, his eyes were not. Those eyes dropped to my hands, flour dough, my pulse. I swallowed and should have apologized. Every instinct said I should. But the dough was already cooling and Chef Bia would kill me before any well-dressed stranger did. "Yes," I said. "It does." Something shifted in his mouth, not a smile, worse, interest. Behind him, one of the managers made a choked noise, like he was about to die from second-hand disrespect. The man shut the door. Only then did the room breathe again. He walked toward me without hurry. He did not look at anyone else. His cologne hit first cedar and something colder under it, like steel left in snow. He stopped on the other side of the prep table and looked at the dough, then at me, then back at my hands. "Your name," he said. "Clara." One dark brow moved. "Only Clara? That's all the bread needs." Chef Bia made a sound behind me that was either horror or a prayer. The man's gaze held mine for one beat too long, then dropped again to the flour on my fingers. "Farina," he said. The word landed cold, observational. Mine before I could refuse it. I frowned. "That's not my name." "No." He looked at my hands again. "It will do." He turned then, and just like that, the room snapped back into motion. Men started breathing, knives started moving, somebody swore in a whisper. Chef Bia marched toward me with murder in her eyes, then stopped halfway when the man, whoever he was, lifted 2 fingers without looking back. Permission, restraint, command, I still did not know. He spoke quietly to the manager, too low for me to hear, and the manager nodded hard enough to break his neck. "Who is that?" I asked Bia under my breath. Her face went blank in the deliberate way of people who knew fear by habit. "Someone you don't ask about." That helpful, huh? She gripped my elbow. Tonight you leave with staff. No arguing. No. The man left as silently as he had come, black coat swallowing the light at the door. I worked until 2:30 with a knot under my ribs I could not knead smooth. Outside, snow had started in dry, bitter flakes. The alley behind Belladonna smelled like yeast and garbage and cold brick. I tucked my scarf higher and stepped out with two servers smoking under the awning. That was when I saw Owen across the street. Not clearly at first. Just a shape, leaning beneath a dead street lamp, hands in his pockets, shoulders I had once mistaken for comfort. Then he shifted, and the old terror in me recognized his posture before my mind allowed his name. My lungs locked. He smiled. Even from across the street, I knew that smile. It was the one he used before apologies, before doors closed, before his fingers tightened around my wrist hard enough to leave questions on some skin I had learned to answer with makeup and lies. One of the servers said something. I did not hear it. Owen took one step off the curb. A car door opened behind me. The man from the kitchen was there again, as if he had stepped out of the night itself. No overcoat now. Just black suit, black gloves, no wasted motion. He looked once at my face, then across the street. Owen stopped moving. The street changed. I felt it happen. Men appeared where there had been no men, one by the newspaper box, one at the corner, one near the idling sedan. All of them still. All of them watching Owen. The stranger touched my elbow only long enough to move me behind him. Get in the car, Farina. My body rebelled at the command, but Owen was still there, and the old fear made choices for me. Who are you? I whispered. His gaze stayed on the street. The reason he won't touch you tonight. Owen's smile faltered. The stranger opened the car door himself and waited. Across from us, Owen looked not angry but confused, and that chilled me more. Men like him never expected another predator to claim the ground first. I got in. The stranger bent once, close enough that I caught the cold edge under his cologne again. From now on, he said, voice flat as a verdict, you do not walk home alone. Chapter 2. The man at my counter. I had spent 2 years building a life out of ordinary things. A rented apartment above a tailor on Taylor Street. Morning coffee from the Dominican place with the cracked green sign. 3 succulents I kept forgetting to water. A radio in the kitchen that only got one station cleanly if I balanced it against the sugar canister. I had chosen small routines because small routines did not shout. They did not break plates, or ask where I had been, or demand to see my phone. They also did not survive a man like Luca DeSantis walking into them. I learned his name the next day because Chicago breathed it in pieces. Not openly, never that. But in the bakery delivery entrance, 2 prep cooks stopped talking when I came near and one muttered, DeSantis was there himself. At the market, a fish seller crossed himself when a black SUV rolled past. On my lunch break, Bia grabbed my wrist and hissed, if he speaks to you again, you answer respectfully and briefly, and for God's sake don't improvise. Who is he? Her mouth flattened. He's the reason Belladonna still stands and the reason half the block pays cash. That told me enough and nothing at all. I should have called the police about Owen. Instead, I changed my route home 3 times and checked every dark reflection between the train station and work. I told myself the man in the suit had scared Owen off. I told myself shadows were just shadows. I told myself a lot of things survivors told themselves because truth was too expensive to keep buying. At 6 that evening, Belladonna opened to a private event upstairs. I stayed in the front pastry station, plating blood orange tarts and pistachio cream horns, while rich women laughed like glassware. My nerves sat too close to my skin. Every time the door opened, I looked up. At 8:13, he walked in. Luca DeSantis did not enter places. Places adjusted around him. He came through the dining room with one man at his shoulder and another behind him. But you noticed him first and last. Dark suit again, no coat this time, a silver watch, that scar at his chin. The kind of face that made you understand why dangerous things survived so long. People kept staring when they should have fled. He stopped at my counter. What do you want? I asked before I could stop myself. One of the men behind him looked scandalized. Luca looked almost bored. Coffee. This is pastry. I can see that, Farina. The nickname should not have done anything. It still landed under my ribs, cold this time, precise. I set down the piping bag harder than necessary. There's an espresso machine 10 feet to your left, and yet, he said, here I am. I hated that my pulse skipped. So I made his coffee, not because he asked. because everyone else in the room had gone quietly rigid, and I was tired of being the reason people stopped breathing. I set the demitasse in front of him. He did not drink it. He looked at my hands instead, at the fine dust of flour I had missed washing off. Then at the fading yellow bruise near my wrist where I had knocked into a rack that morning, and pretended it had not felt like memory. "Who is he?" he asked. To you I knew exactly who he meant. "Nobody." His eyes lifted. "You're lying." "I don't know you well enough to do that politely." Something like approval flickered and was gone. The man beside him barked out a laugh. He was shorter, handsome in an overworked way, with expressive brows and the sort of energy that did not belong next to Luca's stillness. He carried a white paper bag and a bouquet of daisies that had already begun to droop. "Boss, if she keeps talking to you like that, I'm going to fall in love with her too," he said. Luca did not look at him. "You're already occupied." The man sighed to the ceiling. "Rosa respects my emotional complexity." Rosa, Luca said, is a paramedic who has repeatedly asked you to stop arriving at emergency rooms with gunshot victims and bleeding on her shoes. The man straightened. "She said that with feeling. I consider that progress." Against my will, a laugh escaped me. Both men looked at me. The shorter one brightened. "See? I bring warmth to organized criminal ecosystems." Nico Bellini. Future husband of Rosa Morales, current sufferer. "You're not suffering," I said. He pressed a hand to his chest. "Madonna, you wound me. Unrequited love is a chronic illness." Even Luca's mouth shifted a fraction. Then he slid something across the counter. My phone, which I had left charging near the pastry fridge. I stared. "How did you unlock it?" he said. "No, Clara." The use of my name instead of Farina felt oddly worse. I said no. His gaze held mine, not angry, not impatient, just certain. Around us, the room went quiet in layers. My throat tightened with old reflex, the dangerous silence before a man decided whether disobedience amused him. And because fear made traitors of us in familiar ways, I obeyed. I entered my code. He took the phone, keyed in a number, then handed it back. "If Owen Mercer comes near you," he said, "you call that number." Ice slid down my spine. "You know his last name?" "Yes." "How?" He did not answer. Nico studied the ceiling very hard. I looked at Luca and heard myself say, "Men like him never start loud, you know. That's how people miss it. They get quieter, kinder almost, like weather deciding whether to turn." Something changed in Luca's face then. Not much, a still man when going somehow stiller. If I had known what silence had lived in his house before his sister died, I would have heard the echo. I didn't. I only saw something old and ugly move behind his eyes and vanish. His fingers tightened once against the marble counter. "If he appears," he said, voice low enough only I could hear, "you do not reason with him. You do not warn him. You call. And if I don't..." He leaned in just enough for the room to disappear around the edge of him. "Then I'll still know." Before I could answer, movement flashed beyond the window. Owen stood across the street again. This time he was not smiling. He was looking directly at Luca. Luca set a 20 beneath the untouched espresso, turned to Nico and said, "Go home the long way. Rosa likes you alive." Nico clutched his bouquet. "You say the sweetest things?" Then Luca looked at me. "Coat," he said. Not loud, not sharp, still I put it on. By the time I reached the door, Owen was gone. But two black sedans waited at the curb, and Luca was holding the rear door open like he had already decided the shape of the night. Chapter 3. What flower can hide? When fear moved into your life, it did not burst through the front door every day. Sometimes it sat down quietly and learned your schedule. 3 days passed without Owen showing his face. That should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like pressure building in a sealed jar. Luca did not come into Belladonna every night, but his men did. Not obvious bodyguards, not exactly. Just the same faces reappearing at different tables, in dark coats and polished shoes, eating little, watching everything. Belladonna stopped feeling like a restaurant and started feeling like a border checkpoint with better wine. It should have unnerved me. Instead, what unnerved me more was that I had started looking for one face in particular. I hated that. On Friday afternoon, Bea sent me downstairs to check a dry storage delivery because if Paolo signs one more invoice without opening a box, I'll poison him myself. Dry storage sat below street level, cold and lined with flour sacks, imported olive oil, canned San Marzano tomatoes, and enough wine to fund a small coup. The man waiting there was not Paolo. Luca stood beside an open pallet of imported pistachios, as if inspecting contraband and dessert at once. One of his suit jackets lay over a chair. His shirt sleeves were rolled precisely to the forearm, revealing a watch, a cuff of black ink, and a scar that ran white and jagged along the inside of his wrist before disappearing beneath his sleeve. He turned as I came down the steps. Farina, that should not have become familiar in 4 days. It had. What are you doing in my pantry? He glanced around the room. Your pantry. Emotionally, that almost smile threatened again. I went to the flour sacks to hide the fact that he made the air in closed spaces too aware of itself. The new shipment had arrived from Sicily. I cut one bag, rubbed a little between my fingers, then frowned. This isn't right. Luca said nothing. I sniffed the flour again, soft wheat but wrong protein balance. Slight metallic note, not poison, just bad substitution. Chef ordered Tipo Zero, I said. This is cheaper. It'll collapse in the dough. Whoever signed for this got robbed. One of Luca's men, posted near the stairs, shifted uneasily. Luca watched me with unreadable eyes. How do you know? He asked. I rubbed the flour between thumb and forefinger, then touched it to my tongue. Because I'm good. Silence. I looked up. What? You taste ingredients from unsealed shipments. Yes, that's reckless. You're one to talk. A beat. Then another. He should have been offended. Instead he asked, who taught you? My grandmother first, then Chef Bia. My grandmother said good bakers have arrogant hands. And do you? I have excellent hands. That came out wrong enough that heat rushed into my face. Luca's gaze dropped just once to my fingers dusted white again. Something in the room tightened. Neither of us moved. Then one of the cellar doors banged above us and the moment snapped. I cleared my throat and pointed at the pallet. Whoever switched this knew the invoice wouldn't be checked. Meaning they knew how this place works. His eyes went colder, which answered more than the question itself. Belladonna was not just a restaurant. I had already guessed that. But standing in the belly of it, surrounded by imported goods and armed men, pretending to be delivery staff, I finally let the thought finish forming. This was territory, his, and if someone was stealing through Belladonna's supply lines, it was not about flour. Luca stepped closer to the pallet and picked up the invoice. Stay, I'm not a dog. No, he said. You notice details. He went through the paperwork with quick, precise attention. A name on the manifest made something hard settle in his face. What is it? I asked. Nothing you need. That usually means the opposite. He looked at me for a long moment, then folded the page once. The company that handled this pallet belongs to a man who should not be testing my patience. That definitely did not sound legal. Before I could push further, my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. Unknown number. My stomach dropped. Luca's gaze flicked to my pocket. Answer, I stared at him. Why do you assume it's him? Because you stopped breathing. I hate that he was right. I answered and said nothing. For a second there was only static. Then Owen's voice, warm and hateful in equal measure. Clara, the cellar blurred around the edges. I miss your hands, he said. Still smell like sugar? I could not speak. My throat had sealed. Luca crossed the distance between us without a sound and took the phone gently from my fingers. His face did not change. He lifted it to his ear. There was a pause, a much longer one. Then Luca said almost pleasantly, You've mistaken her for someone available. He listened, expressionless. No, he said, you'll come to me. He ended the call. What did he say? I asked. Luca slipped the phone into his pocket, as if that were now the obvious place for it to live. He wanted to know whether you still kept old things in flour tins. Every muscle in my body went tight. I had one flour tin at home, red enamel dented at the lid, hidden above the highest shelf in my kitchen. Luca saw the answer on my face. What's in it, Clara? Nothing. Don't. I backed up a step. It's mine. His jaw tightened once. Then someone taught him to ask the right question. The cellar door opened again. This time it was Nico, half breathless, carrying no flowers but somehow the same dramatic atmosphere. Boss, he said, then noticed me and visibly edited himself. I bring delightful news wrapped in catastrophe. Speak, Nico grimaced. One of our trucks got hit in Bridgeport. Also, Rosa said if I show up at County General with bullet wounds one more time, she'll date a dentist out of principle. That, I said faintly, is the part you consider catastrophe? He looked offended. You don't know her smile. Luca was already putting on his jacket. What am I supposed to do? I asked. His hand paused at the lapel. Go home. That sounds stupid. Yes, he looked at me. So don't do anything else. He started for the stairs, then stopped beside me long enough to murmur, Pack a bag tonight, Farina. I froze. For what? His eyes held mine, unreadable and absolute. For when I stop asking. Chapter 4, The touch that wasn't gentle. I did not pack the bag. I took the red flower tin down from my highest shelf and sat on my kitchen floor with it in my lap instead. It was ridiculous how ordinary it looked, enamel chipped at the rim, little painted daisies faded by steam and time. The kind of thing you inherited from a grandmother or found at a flea market and filled with sugar packets. Inside, beneath old recipe cards and a pawn ticket I should have thrown out years ago, lay a silver St. Christopher medal on a broken chain. I had not touched it in almost 3 years. The metal felt colder than it should have. Memory came in pieces, same as always. County General, winter, the fluorescent light too bright. I had been there with Bia because she had sliced her hand open on a sugar spindle and needed stitches. In the women's restroom, a pregnant stranger in a blue wool coat had grabbed my wrist so hard her nails left crescents. Her face had been swollen, her lips split. She kept looking at the door like it might grow hands. "Please," she had whispered. "If anyone asks, you never saw me. I had been 24 and stupid in the ways people who had not yet paid enough for fear could be stupid." I told her she needed security, police, a doctor. She laughed once, small and broken. Then she shoved the medal into my hand. "If something happens," she said, voice shaking, "tell Luca Vittorio smiles when he lies." I asked who Luca was. She never answered. The next morning the news said a socialite named Bianca De Luca. No, DeSantis, I corrected myself now with a sick twist, had died in a car accident on Lakeshore. I had understood 2 things at once then. The woman in the bathroom had not been safe, and I was not brave enough to tell anyone what she had said. I had kept the medal anyway. Shame had weight. Mine fit in my palm. The apartment buzzer screamed at 1 in the morning. I nearly dropped the tin. Then I heard it again, long, violent, followed by pounding on the front building door. My blood went cold. "Clara," Owen shouted from downstairs. "I know you're in there." Every old instinct returned at once. Lights off, no noise, breathe smaller. The pounding started again. "Open the damn door." I backed into the kitchen and almost called the number Luca had put in my phone. Almost. Then glass shattered in the living room. I moved before I thought. Tin under my arm, knife from the drying rack in my hand, bare feet silent on old wood. By the time I reached the hall, my apartment door was splintering inward. I dialed. He answered on the first ring. No greeting, just where. My voice came thin and strange. "My apartment, stay on the line." The door gave way with a crack. I ran, not to the fire escape. Owen would expect that. I bolted down the hall toward the back stairwell, phone crushed to my ear, hearing him swear as he crashed inside behind me. "Clara," Luca's voice sharper now, "he's here," a curse in Italian. Then down or up? Stairs. Take them. I hit the stairwell and slammed the metal door behind me just as O's hand caught the frame. The force jolted through my shoulder. He shoved, I shoved back. The knife slipped in my sweaty grip. Then another hand caught the door from my side. Luca. I did not see him arrive. 1 second the metal was giving way under Owen's weight. The next it was solid with Luca's hand flat against it. Suit jacket open, tie gone, eyes black with a kind of focus that stripped all softness from the world. "Behind me," he said. The order came out like instinct, not decision. My body obeyed before my pride did. Owen forced the door 3 inches, enough for me to see his face, flushed and furious. "You think you can hide her?" he spat. Luca's expression did not change. "Yes." Then he drove the stairwell door forward so hard Owen's head snapped back against the frame. It ended fast after that, too fast. Footsteps thundered below and above. Men I had never heard coming filled the stairwell. Owen's swung once wild. Luca caught his wrist, twisted, and something cracked. Owen screamed. I flinched. Luca heard it. He turned his head just enough to check my face. In that one violent, impossible second, with Owen on his knees gasping and armed men crowding the stairs, Luca's hand came up and pressed once to the back of my neck. "Not gentle, we're steady. Look at me," he said. I did. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head. "Good." Nico came barreling up the lower stairs a second later, breathing hard and carrying, because God had a sense of humor, a thermos and a bouquet of carnations. "I brought tea," he announced, then saw Owen crumpled on the landing. And wow, that really escalated while I was parking. Luca did not move his hand from my neck. "Take her downstairs," Nico blinked. "Me?" Boss Rosa specifically said I am not to shepherd traumatized women while men with broken wrists cry nearby. She said I lack emotional boundaries. You lack survival instinct. That too. I would have laughed if my knees had not started shaking all at once. Luca felt it. His hand tightened once, then slid away. Clara, he said, finally using my name like it mattered. You're coming with me. No, every head in the stairwell turned toward me. Luca's eyes narrowed by a fraction. You're in danger. I noticed. Owen Mercer works for Vittorio Falco. The name meant nothing to me. The way everyone else reacted meant it should have. He took money to keep you frightened and visible, Luca continued. Tonight he got impatient. I stared. Why that, he said, voice going quiet in a way that made Nico stop fidgeting, is the question. Fast mystery. Answer and door in one. He was not just some powerful man. He was Luca DeSantis, and I had stumbled into a war by surviving the wrong person. What are you to all this? I asked. He held my gaze without flinching. I'm the man who decides who reaches you. Silence. Then lower, because truth had its own gravity. And I'm the head of this family. There it was, no threat in the words. No brag. Somehow that made them worse. I should have run from him then. Instead I said, I need my bag. You'll have a new one. I need my things. His gaze dropped briefly to the hand holding the red flowers tin tight against my ribs. Not my bag then, that. Something unreadable crossed his face. Bring the tin, he said. That was the moment the fast mystery closed, and the slow one opened its mouth. Because Owen, groaning on the landing below, lifted his swollen face and slurred, Ask her about the hospital. The stairwell went cold. Luca turned very slowly. What hospital? Owen laughed blood into his teeth. And for the first time since he had entered my life, Luca looked not calm but dangerous enough to strip paint from the walls. Chapter 5. The tin on my highest shelf. Luca's house was not a house, it was a fortress disguised as taste. Stone on the outside, dark wood on the inside, too quiet everywhere. No chandeliers, no gold nonsense, none of the cheap fantasies I would have expected from men who needed the world to know they could buy it twice. Just space. Precision. Doors thick enough to stop bullets and probably conversations too. He put me in a bedroom overlooking a walled garden silvered by snow. Then he left me there with a tray of food I did not touch, and two women who would bring me anything I asked for, except presumably freedom. At dawn, I carried the red tin to the bathroom and locked the door like a child. The metal lay in my palm, chain twisted, St. Christopher worn nearly smooth by somebody else's fear. Beneath it, tucked under one yellowing recipe card, there was a scrap of paper I had forgotten, not paper exactly. The corner torn from a hospital wristband, blueprint nearly faded, beyond my knees weakened, Bianca. A knock sounded on the door, not loud, Clara, Luca. I swallowed the metal back into my fist and opened the door 2 inches. He stood on the other side in a fresh white shirt, tie undone, dark circles shadowing the edges beneath his eyes as if sleep had learned not to approach him. He looked once at my face, once at my closed hand. You didn't eat. That's romantic. No, he said. It's inconvenient. I should have hated that. Instead, it nearly steadied me. He glanced at the edge of the wristband paper caught between my fingers. Whatever he saw in my expression made something sharpen in his. Tell me. I wanted not to. Shame was a strange animal. It preferred silence, even when silence had already done enough damage. But Owen had known. Luca had looked at my flower tin as if it might crack open the floor beneath him. And somewhere inside that house, men were deciding things with my name attached to them. So I told him. Not beautifully. Not bravely. Just in pieces. County General. These stitches, the frightened woman in the bathroom, the split lip, the blue coat, the way her hands shook when she pressed the metal into mine. The words, tell Luca Vittorio smiles when he lies. The news report the next morning, the fact that I had done nothing. When I finished, Luca had not moved at all. Show me, he said. I opened my hand. The metal looked very small there. For a second, I thought he might not take it. Then his fingers closed around it with shocking care, like something breakable had been returned to him after too many years underground. His jaw worked once. Bianca, he said, and the name came out raw enough to scrape. I stared. That was her. He nodded once. My stomach fell clean through me. I should have gone to someone. Yes, he said it without mercy, without comfort, because it was true. The shame I had carried for 3 years changed shape right there. It stopped being private. It became a room we were both standing in. I was scared, I whispered. His eyes lifted to mine. I know, not absolution. Worse. Understanding. That was when the second thing broke open. The man she named, he said. Vittorio Falco is my uncle. I went still. Outside the bathroom, footsteps crossed the hall and faded. Inside, the air felt trapped and warm and too close. I could smell his cologne under the starch of clean cotton, and under that, something sleepless. "She tried to warn you," I said. "Yes, didn't she trust the police?" He laughed once. There was nothing kind in it. Bianca had already married into the wrong kind of protection. He did not explain further. He didn't need to. Some wounds didn't bleed in public. They just changed the weather of a man. "Why is Owen asking about this now?" I asked. "That," he said, "is what I'm about to find out." He turned to go. I caught his sleeve before I could think better of it. His whole body stilled. The cotton beneath my fingers was warm. So was the skin under that jagged wrist scar where the cuff had shifted back. We both looked at my hand, almost. He could have leaned in. I could have failed to move. Instead, I let go. "If Bianca trusted me enough to hand me that," I said, "then maybe she said something else. Maybe I forgot. Maybe if I think." "You will think," he said quietly. "After you eat, that should not have sounded tender." He left with the medal. Downstairs, the house woke around me in disciplined silence. Men passed through corridors with eyes averted. Some swear a phone rang once and was answered before the second ring. I found the kitchen because kitchens made sense, and because panic was easier to bear with dough. No one tried to stop me. An hour later, I was elbow-deep in bread when Nico drifted in with a bruised cheek, a silk tie thrown over one shoulder, and a bouquet of fresh daisies. "You people really process trauma with carbs," he said hopefully. "You people?" The heavily surveilled, the emotionally burdened, the stunning. He leaned on the counter. "Also, Rosa likes daisies. Or maybe she likes not getting flowers from men with blood on their cuffs. The distinction is becoming spiritually important." I almost smiled. "Did you get punched?" he sighed. "Door frame." "Long story. I made it dramatic to honor the pain. I shaped dough harder than necessary." "Does he always do this? Hover ominously or care too much in silence?" I looked up. Nico winced. I've said too much. I'm going to live on that regret for at least 20 minutes. Before I could ask, the back door opened. Luca stepped in with Paolo, his gray-haired consigliere, and another man I did not know. All of them stopped when they saw me at the counter, flour on my arms to the elbow, bread lined in neat rising rows. Luca's gaze rested on my hands. "Farina," he said. The nickname had changed. Not warm, not yet. But less like possession, more like recognition. I should have looked away. Instead, I held his gaze. "What did you find?" He glanced at Paolo. The older man looked tired in the marrow. "Your apartment was searched before Owen came up the stairs," Paolo said. "Clean work, fast." Someone knew exactly where to look. My stomach dropped. "For the medal." "Yes," Luca said. "Then there's a traitor," I whispered. A silence moved through the room. Because Paolo knew it, Luca knew it. And suddenly, I did too. Only a small circle would have known what Bianca might have been carrying. Somebody had kept that question alive for years. I looked from one hard face to another and heard Bianca's voice again. "Tell Luca Vittorio smiles when he lies." The listener would have known already, from the way every time Vittorio's name surfaced, Luca's men went careful and Paolo went gray. I didn't, not yet. I only knew the room had shifted again. And for the first time, Luca did not tell me I needed to know less. He said, "Stay close." We are past secrecy now. Chapter 6. The night the street turned red war did not arrive with trumpets. It arrived with traffic. Luca insisted I move between Belladonna and his house only in convoy after that. 2 cars minimum, different routes, no windows down, no predictability. I told him it made me feel kidnapped. "You'd notice if I kidnapped you," he said. "I already have." Nico, driving, muttered, "For what it's worth, Miss Clara, if this were a kidnapping, the snacks would be worse." "You packed snacks?" He looked offended in the rearview mirror. "Rosa says trauma drops blood sugar." "Also," she said, "if I die in leather loafers, she won't attend my funeral out of principle, so I've begun making healthier choices." He held up a bag of almonds like evidence of maturity. In the front passenger seat, Luca did not react. That should have comforted me. It did not. He had been too quiet all day, not cold, worse, focused, the kind of silence that sharpened men around him into weapons. We were 2 blocks from Belladonna when the first car hit us broadside. The world snapped sideways. Metal screamed. Glass burst. Nico cursed with operatic conviction as the SUV fishtailed into a fire hydrant. Cold water geysered white across the windshield. I slammed hard against the door and tasted blood. "Down," Luca barked. Gunshots shattered the next breath. Not movie sounds, worse. Flat, cracking violence that punched pieces out of the night. Luca was already over me, one arm braced across my shoulders, body covering mine as the rear window blew inward in glittering fragments. Nico, somehow still clutching the almonds, yelled, "If I survive this, I'm proposing to Rosa in a helmet." The second volley came from the left. Luca shoved my head lower and drew a gun in one fluid motion I barely saw happen. The inside of the car smelled like gunpowder, radiator steam, and the sharp copper of my own split lip. "Stay down, Farina." Then he opened the door and stepped into hell. I should say I listened. I didn't. I lifted my head just enough to see him. He moved like stillness finally allowed to become violent. No wasted motion. No shouting. Men fell around the flooded street as he fired once, twice, changed angle, fired again. His suit darkened at the shoulder, and for one nauseating second I thought blood. But it was hydrant spray. The headlights of the crippled SUV caught him in hard white bars, face expressionless, gun steady, eyes like winter itself. Then another shooter came from the alley. "Luca!" I screamed it before I knew I had. He turned in time, shot once. The man dropped. Someone yanked my door open. Owen. His face was raw with hate, one wrist braced awkwardly from the break Luca had given him. He grabbed my coat and dragged me half out of the car. I kicked wildly, catching his shin. He swore, slapped a hand over my mouth, and something happened to Luca. Later I would understand I had seen pieces of the monster before. This was the whole thing. He covered the distance in a blur and hit Owen hard enough to drive them both into the side of the car. Owen's hand tore from my mouth. Luca struck again and again. No sound from him except breath. Owen tried to speak. Tried to beg. Luca seized his throat and slammed him against the dented door until metal buckled. I had never seen a man go that feral without losing control. That was the frightening part. He was in control. Every brutal inch of it. For one paragraph of one terrible second, I was not in my own mind, but in his. Blood on the street, her voice on my name, Bianca's blue coat in a bathroom. He never reached in time. Claire dragged by the same kind of hand, and the old vow he had built his life around splitting open again. "I will not arrive too late. I will not. I will not." Then I was myself again, shaking in the shattered car while Luca pressed the gun under Owen's jaw. "Who gave the order?" he asked. Owen laughed bloodily. "You know," Luca's hand tightened. A second car screeched in. Men poured out, Paolo shouting. Someone pulling Nico from the front seat while he insisted, "Check the almonds." They took a brave hit. I should not have laughed. I did. It came out cracked and half hysterical. Luca looked at me at once. The gun disappeared back into his waistband. He crossed to me and crouched. Water sprayed across us from the broken hydrant in freezing needles. My hands shook so badly I could not unclench them. "Clara," I couldn't stop. He took my wrists gently, then cursed under his breath when he saw the blood there wasn't mine. Just glass cuts. Small. Many. His thumbs moved over the flower pail inside of my wrists, like he was counting what remained. "You're bleeding," I whispered. "Not much. That was a lie." A line of dark red ran from a crease near his ribs beneath the suit. "Sit still," I said. "I am sitting still. Shut up." A breath that might have been a laugh touched his mouth and was gone. I tore open the glove box and found a clean cloth. Pressed it to his side. He sucked in air, eyes locking on mine. Almost so close the world narrowed to cold water, gun smoke, his breath, my shaking hands against his body. "Why me?" I whispered before I could stop myself. He looked at the cloth between my hands, then at the flour, still ghosting my knuckles from the bread I had shaped before we left. "Because you told me to close the door," he said quietly. "Because everyone else in that room forgot how to breathe, and you kept working." Something inside me went still. Nico propped against the hood by two grim bodyguards called weakly. "If this becomes a romantic moment, I need everyone to remember I survived for narrative balance." That broke the spell by half an inch. Later, at the safe house, after stitches and silence and too much adrenaline, Luca found me in the dark kitchen, standing barefoot by the sink. He said my name once I turned. He touched my face like asking a question. This time I did not move. Chapter 7. The kiss he did not steal. This time I did not move. Luca's hand stayed at my face, rougher than tenderness and somehow more careful for it. His thumb brushed the cut at my lip, not enough to hurt, just enough to remind me I was still inside my body and not trapped somewhere back in the street with glass in my hair and Owen's hand on my coat. The kitchen was dark except for the stove light over the range. It caught silver on the scar at Luca's chin and turned his eyes into something unreadable and fever-quiet. "You should be in bed," he said. "You should be stitched somewhere less dramatic." His mouth shifted, tired. "Barely there. That already happened." His hand did not leave my face. I should have stepped back. I knew that. Men like Luca were not storms you stood still for unless you were ready to lose your roof. Instead, I heard myself ask, "Do you always touch people like you're issuing orders?" No, that answer went through me too easily. Then what is this? His gaze dropped to my mouth, then lifted again with visible restraint, like even looking was something he had decided to do carefully. "This," he said quietly, "is me asking whether you want me to stop." No man had ever asked me that in a tone that implied the answer mattered more than his wanting. I swallowed. He felt it under his thumb. "No," I whispered. The word changed the air. Luca bent toward me slowly enough that I could have turned away. I did not. The first touch of his mouth against mine was almost nothing. Warm, measured, a question held inside restraint. No taking in it, no claim. Just a man with violence in his hands being impossibly careful with one thing. Then I kissed him back, his breath caught, one small betrayal. His hand slid to the back of my neck, not forcing, only holding. The kiss deepened by a fraction, then another, until my fingers had closed in the front of shirt and I could feel the bandage at his ribs brush my wrist when he stepped closer. Heat rose fast and dangerous, then Luca pulled away first. I stared at him, dazed and slightly offended. His forehead touched mine once, briefly, as if he did not trust himself with more. "You're in shock," he said. "That's deeply irritating." Yes, I could feel the almost law in him, then it vanished. His eyes dropped to the red tin still on the counter between us, to the recipe cards inside, and something colder returned. "Show me everything in it." Romance apparently had a very short lifespan in his world. I exhaled and opened the tin. Recipe cards, the pawn ticket, the torn hospital band, and one stiff card written in cramped blue ink I had never looked at closely because I had assumed it belonged to my grandmother. Luca picked it up. It wasn't a recipe, at least not exactly. Flour, water, yeast, salt, the usual order. But the ratios were wrong, wildly wrong, too much salt, not enough water. Times written in the margins that made no culinary sense at all. I took it from him and looked again. Then I froze. "What?" he asked. I turned the card sideways. "These aren't baking ratios," I said slowly. "They're weights." Luca went still. I pointed. 25, 50, 100. Those are sack sizes, delivery sizes. "And these?" I touched the margin notes. "These aren't rise times. They're times of arrival." He watched my face instead of the card. "You're sure?" "Yes." On the back, barely visible beneath a grease stain, were initials and 3 letters. BD. "Cellar north wall, false brick." Luca took the card from me again. "Belladonna," he said. The kitchen went silent around us. I looked up. Bianca hid something there. "Yes. Do you think it's still there?" His jaw tightened. "If Vittorio hasn't found it." He reached for his phone. I caught his wrist. The old scar ran under my fingers, white and ridged. He looked down at my hand, then at me. "If Bianca left it," I said, "I'm coming." "No, yes. Clara, you brought me into this house because I mattered to it. Don't tell me now I matter too much to stand in the room." Something dark and unwillingly impressed moved behind his eyes. From the doorway, Nico's voice floated in. "I hate to interrupt whatever gothic kitchen seduction this is, but if we are doing secrets and cellars, I would love 3 minutes to put on a jacket and maybe emotionally prepare." We both turned. Nico stood there holding a mug, his bruised cheek turning plum in the low light. He took one look at our faces and sighed. "Ah," he said, "so we kissed and found evidence." "Honestly, that feels on brand." Luca said, "Get Paolo." Nico saluted with the mug. "And perhaps a priest." An hour later, Belladonna waited for us dark and locked, all crystal and linen stripped of glamour by midnight silence. We entered through the delivery door. The cellar smelled like dust, cork, stone, and flour. I felt Bianca there before I saw anything at all. Maybe because fear lingered in places longer than perfume did. Luca moved to the north wall with a flashlight, while Paolo checked the stairs, and Nico muttered about haunting. I studied the brickwork the way I studied dough, by pattern, by imperfection, by what did not match the rest. "There," I said. One brick sat a shade cleaner than the others. Luca pried it loose with a knife. Inside the wall was a velvet pouch gone gray with age. No one spoke. Luca opened it. There was a flash drive, a key, and a folded note. He read the note once, face turning into stone. "What does it say?" I asked. For a moment, I thought he would refuse. Then he handed it to me. If you are reading this, I was right to be afraid. Trust no one who smiles before the lie. He has judges, police, and one man in your house. I never learned which one. B. Luca's stillness changed shape. Not shock, not grief. Recognition. Then the cellar lights went out. And someone above us locked the door. Chapter 8. The brick in the wall darkness in a cellar had weight. It pressed at the eyes, filled the mouth, turned every breath into something borrowed. Above us, footsteps moved once across the floorboards and stopped. Nico swore softly. That feels extremely bad. Paolo was already on the stairs, gun out, testing the handle. Locked. Luca handed me the flashlight without looking, then moved in the dark with unnerving certainty. I heard metal scrape. Heard him check the second exit near the storage racks, also locked. Stay behind me, he said. You say that like it's ever worked. Tonight it will. That would have been comforting if the room had not smelled, suddenly, sharply, wrong. Not dust, not flour, gasoline. My stomach dropped. Luca. He heard it in my voice. What? I swept the flashlight low. Liquid glistened under the bottom shelf of imported olive oil seeping thinly across the stone. Oh, Nico said. That is aggressively terrible. Then something hit the cellar door from above. A bottle. Glass shattered. The smell exploded. Luca crossed the room in 2 strides and grabbed my arm just as fire rolled down the stairs. Heat roared up the walls. The cellar became orange, alive, starving. Move! We bolted smoke and shelves. Paolo shot the secondary lock twice, once, twice. The metal screamed and gave. Cold air slammed in from the alley access behind the wine racks just as flames took the first row of flour sacks. Luca shoved me through the narrow service door ahead of him. Nico came behind coughing and inventing whole new branches of Italian blasphemy. Paolo emerged last, jacket sleeve burning. Luca smothered it with his bare hands before turning back toward the cellar as if he might go in again. Luca, I grabbed him hard. No, the drive, you have it. That stopped him. His hand went to the inside pocket of his coat. Found it once, only then did he breathe. Belladonna's rear alley flooded with men inside 30 seconds, armed, silent, efficient. 2 of Luca's security detail came from the far gate where there should have been no one. One glanced at the broken lock, then at Luca and said, "Front cameras looped 12 minutes ago, inside job." No one said it, no one needed to. Sirens sounded far off, not close enough yet. Paolo coughed into his handkerchief and looked older than I had ever seen him. Whoever locked us down knew the wall mattered. Luca's face gave nothing back, but I had started to learn his different kinds of silence. This one was murderous. Back at the house, the flash drive sat on the dining table like a live charge. No one plugged it into anything until Luca's tech man, a quiet woman named Elia, arrived with a laptop stripped of network access and enough hardware to dismantle a government office. I watched over her shoulder while Luca stood behind me and Paolo took the far end of the room. Folders opened. Shipping records, judges' names, cash transfers, photos, police captains, dock foremen, council aides. Enough dirt to bury a city block, then another folder. Belladonna private inside were surveillance stills and invoices spanning 4 years. Belladonna was not just a restaurant, it was a ledger with tablecloths, a meeting point, a clean face over dirty arteries. And buried in the middle of it all was a list of monthly payments to a single name, Massimo Greco the manager. The one who had nearly choked on my disrespect the first night. Luca walked into the kitchen. Nico whistled low. Well, that's hideous. Paolo rubbed a hand over his mouth. He managed bookings, cellar access, vendor schedules, and staff exits, I said. Everyone looked at me. I heard my own pulse in my ears. He always knew who was leaving late, I said, who walked home alone. Which nights I closed. Luca's gaze fixed on the screen so hard it looked like violence. Another file opened, audio. Bianca's voice filled the room, thin, distorted, frightened enough to break something under my ribs. If anything happens to me, it was Vittorio. Luca will blame the wrong men because he still believes blood means loyalty. It doesn't. It means leverage. Luca did not move. Not 1 inch, Bianca continued, breathing uneven. There's someone near him already compromised. I haven't learned who. If I can't get out, the recording cut. Silence followed, the kind that made even the walls feel unwilling to listen. Then Luca said very softly, "Find Greco." No one in the room mistook that for a request. Nico straightened. "Alive?" Luca's eyes stayed on the dark laptop screen. For now, the room dispersed into action around him. Calls. Orders, weapons checked, cars moved, I stayed where I was. After a long time, Luca said, "You should sleep." I laughed once. It sounded terrible. He looked at me then, properly. Took in the smoke, still clinging to my clothes, the singed edge of my sleeve. The fact that my hands had not fully stopped shaking since the fire. "Come here," he said. I should have objected on principle. Instead, I went. He drew me in against him, carefully because of his wound, and set one hand at the back of my head. No seduction in it this time, no edge, just shelter. Against his shirt, I said, "She knew she was going to die." "Yes, and no one saved her." His hand tightened once. "No." I closed my eyes. He spoke into my hair, voice low and steady, and far more dangerous than if he had shouted. "I will not let him take another woman out of my life." There was too much promise in that to answer. So I stayed where I was until the house filled with war. Chapter 9. The man who had been watching Massimo Greco disappeared before dawn. That was answer enough. Belladonna opened the next night under armed discretion and immaculate lighting because apparently organized crime respected reservations. Luca wanted the restaurant functioning, said it calmed the block, said panic made bad witnesses. I thought that was an elegant way of saying power worked best when it looked expensive. He did not let me return to work. I went anyway, not in defiance, not exactly. More because fear had already taken too much from me, and I refused to hand it my oven mitts too. I found Luca in the garden before sunrise, standing coatless in the cold, with a cup of black coffee he had forgotten to drink. "You can't stop me from baking forever," I said. He did not turn. "Watch me, I mean at Belladonna." Now he looked. "No, Luca, Clara, it's my job, it's a target." I folded my arms. That's not the same thing. It is when people are shooting at the street. Fair, still irritating. I stepped closer. Frost silvered the stone bench between us. Beyond the wall, the city was waking in slow gray layers. "You knew about me before Owen showed up again," I said. Nothing changed in his face. Which by now was answer enough that I wanted the actual words. "How long?" He took a sip of coffee he didn't want. 6 months. I stared. 6 months? I found the hospital footage. The world narrowed. "You looked for me." "Yes, why?" His gaze held mine without softness. That was one thing about Luca. When he chose truth, he chose all of it. Because Bianca died, leaving evidence with a woman no one could identify. Because Vittorio started asking old questions. Because if he found you first, you would already be dead. A chill moved through me deeper than the winter air. "So you had men following me?" "Yes, watching my apartment." "Yes, Belladonna, my walk home." "The alley." He set the coffee down. Yes, I should have been furious. Part of me was. A louder part remembered Owen beneath dead street lamps. Remembered not being touched because someone else had reached the ground first. I looked away toward the bare garden vines. "You could have told me." "No," the bluntness of it almost made me laugh. "Why not?" "Because you would have run." That landed too cleanly to deny. After a moment I said, "You don't get to protect me by deciding everything for me." His expression changed by half a breath. Enough to tell me he knew that. Enough to tell me he hated how often necessity disagreed. "I know," he said. The apology wasn't in the words. It lived behind them. I leaned against the cold stone wall. "That's a terrible habit you have." "I have many." Comforting. The corner of his mouth moved. Then he said quieter, "I also know I am asking a woman who has had choice taken from her to trust a man who often speaks like a command." That stole my next answer. Because it was too accurate. Because he saw the bruise beneath the bruise and did not look away from it. I asked the only thing left. "Why did you kiss me then?" He stepped toward me once. Not enough to trap. Enough to matter. "Because I wanted to," he said. "Because you wanted me to. And because I have spent 6 months watching you survive things alone." His hand came up, not touching me yet. "I would like," he said carefully, "to stop doing that from a distance." There were men who said beautiful things cheaply. Luca spoke like every word cost blood. I put my hand in his. It felt less like surrender than I expected. Later that afternoon, while the house turned over intelligence and routes and names, I made bread in the kitchen with one of the downstairs women, Teresa, who approved of my shaping technique and disapproved of everybody else's knife drawer. Nico wandered in at noon, carrying a paper bag and emotional overinvestment. "Rosa accepted lunch," he announced. "Which is not acceptance of me, but is certainly adjacent to destiny." "Congratulations," I said. He beamed. Then, lowering his voice dramatically, "Also, your terrifying man has not blinked since dawn and once threatened a city inspector into self-reflection." He's not my terrifying man, Nico considered. Temporarily unassigned then. Before I could throw flour at him, Luca entered with Paolo and a man I recognized only vaguely from Belladonna's front office. Not Massimo, the accountant. He looked terrified. Within 10 minutes, the truth came in pieces. Massimo had been running schedules to Vittorio for 2 years, but he had not acted alone. Payments moved through shell vendor accounts approved upstairs by Belladonna's financial office. Several names were involved, none from Luca's innermost circle. Paolo sagged in visible relief for exactly 1 second before guilt replaced it. Bianca had been right. The compromised man had not been in the house literally. He had been in the business, still close enough, still deadly. The accountant broke completely when Luca placed Bianca's audio file on the table and let him hear 10 seconds of her voice. Massimo was hiding at an old flour warehouse on the South Branch, waiting for transport out. I looked at Luca. He looked back. No, he said. I wasn't going to ask. Good. I was going to insist. Nico groaned into the paper bag. I love you both, but one day you will kill me by temperament alone. Luca ignored him and moved toward the door. I caught his sleeve. He glanced down. Bring him back alive, I said. A shadow crossed his face. Why? Because dead men don't explain what Bianca never got to. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he nodded once. When he came back after midnight, his knuckles were split, and Massimo Greco was in the basement, breathing through 3 broken teeth. I was waiting in the kitchen with hot water and bandages. Luca stopped in the doorway when he saw me. You should be asleep. You say that a lot for a man who doesn't do it himself. He came closer anyway. I cleaned his hands in silence. He let me. That more than anything felt intimate. Violence still clung to him in the set of his shoulders, in the stillness that followed it. But under my fingers he became only skin, scar, pulse. When I wrapped the last knuckle, I said, "Did he talk?" "Yes." "And?" Luca looked down at my work. "Vittorio wants the drive because it contains proof Bianca was pregnant when she died." I froze. "With whose child?" Luca's eyes lifted. "Mine," he said. The room went very still. All at once, Bianca stopped being a dead woman in a blue coat and became something unbearable and living in the space between us. "Oh," I whispered. Luca turned away before I could decide whether to touch him. That was how I knew grief was still the sharpest thing in him. Chapter 10. The lie that wore a smile Massimo lasted less than 12 hours under the weight of Luca's patience. That, according to Nico, was more frightening than ordinary torture because it implied planning. By evening, we knew enough to understand the shape of the trap, and not enough to avoid its teeth. Vittorio wanted the drive, yes, but more than that, he wanted Luca publicly unstable, reckless, grief-drunk. Easy to turn on by the men still deciding which bloodline to back. A dead uncle inside a private war was manageable. A boss who looked out of control was not. So Vittorio kept using me. Not because I mattered to him. Because I mattered to Luca visibly now. I learned that the ugly way. Rosa called just after 9. Not Luca's phone. Mine. Clipped voice, background noise. "Clara, I'm at county." Nico got clipped. "He keeps asking for you, because apparently you're the calm one now." My blood went cold. Nico and clipped in the same sentence left room for several terrible possibilities. I was already halfway to the hall when Luca stepped out of his office. "Where?" "Nico's hurt." He watched my face for 1 beat too long, then held out his hand for the phone. I passed it over. He listened, said nothing, ended the call. It wasn't Rosa. The floor seemed to tilt. How do you know? Because Rosa would have led with an insult. Fair, devastating, and not the point. It sounded like her. Yes, I went cold all over. He's inside our phones, not phones. Habits, meaning he knew who I would move for, meaning we had all become predictable in the stupidest, most human ways. Luca was already shouting orders, routes changed, cars reassigned, 2 men sent to county, 3 to Belladonna. Paolo downstairs. Nico, discovered very much alive and deeply offended at being used as emotional bait, arrived in the doorway with a sandwich in one hand and murder in his expression. "I am going to take this as a declaration of war against my recovery arc," he said, but the damage was done. The house had shifted into response, and in response mistakes happened. Mine came 20 minutes later. Teresa's mentioned the old recipe card was missing from the kitchen counter where I had left the copied notes. I remembered at once, not the original but the transcription I'd made, with Bianca's weights and times. I had left it at Belladonna the afternoon before tucked into my pastry notebook. Vittorio's men didn't need the original if they could figure out what else Bianca had hidden. I need to go to the restaurant, I said. No, said Luca, Nico, and Paolo at the exact same time. It'll take 10 minutes. No, Luca repeated. He'll search it. He already has. Not the front station. Clara, you can send 6 men with me. Clara. I hated that my name sounded like a locked door in his mouth. And because I hated it, because fear and usefulness made a bad combination, because I was tired of being protected like an artifact in expensive packaging, I went anyway. Not through the front. Through the service alley with one house guard I had bribed with an expression and the promise I would be back before Luca finished strangling him. I was in Belladonna for exactly 4 minutes before the lights died. Again. I did not even have time to be angry at the thematic consistency. A hand clamped over my mouth from behind. Not Owen's. Too professional, too fast. I drove my elbow back, caught a rib, heard a grunt, almost broke free. Then a needle of pain slid into my neck and the floor tilted sideways. The last thing I saw before darkness took me was the pastry counter, spotless and shining under emergency light, as if nothing ugly had ever happened there at all. When I woke, my wrists were zip-tied to a chair and Vittorio Falco was smiling at me from across a bare concrete room. Bianca had been right. He smiled before the lie. He was older than Luca by maybe 15 years, silver, at the temples, elegant in the way expensive snakes were elegant. Beautiful hands, soft voice, the kind of man charities adored and widows trusted by mistake. You've caused a great deal of inconvenience, he said pleasantly. My mouth was dry. Then I'm healing, that smile widened. Ah, I see why he likes you. I looked around. Warehouse, high windows. River smell, one door, one visible guard. Where's Massimo? Dead. Something in me sank. You killed him? He became less useful. Of course he had. Vittorio rose and came closer. My nephew mistakes himself for a good man because he is selective about his brutality. Tiresome trait in leadership. You had Bianca killed. His expression saddened with practiced elegance. There it is. The simple version. No, my dear, Bianca was unstable, emotional. Pregnant women often are. My whole body went cold. The smile remained before the lie. I stared at him and knew. He didn't know, I said. For the first time, Vittorio's eyes sharpened. You're brighter than you look. Luca had not known Bianca was pregnant. Vittorio had hidden it, arranged the accident, buried the medical report, let Luca build his empire around rage without ever understanding the full theft. I leaned back in the chair and tasted blood where I had bitten my cheek. Then you should probably kill me, I said, because I'm definitely telling him. He chuckled. Oh, child. That's why you're here. He's on his way. The door opened behind him. And Owen limped in, one wrist braced, face still marked from the street. Hatred hit me so hard it tasted metallic. He smiled crookedly. Miss me? No, I said, but I do hope he breaks the other hand. Owen laughed. Vittorio sighed. Romance makes fools of dangerous men. Let's see how far his reach is. Then lightly, almost kindly, try not to scream too early. It cheapens the effect. Chapter 11. The night he arrived on time, the first shot came before Luca did. It punched through the warehouse window high above us. Glass rained down. One guard turned toward the sound and died before he finished the motion. Then everything broke. Gunfire split the room from 3 directions at once. Vittorio dropped sideways behind a steel column with astonishing speed for a man his age. Owen swore and lunged toward me, using my chair as cover. I kicked at his knee with both feet and sent us crashing sideways just as bullets tore through the crate behind us. Outside, tires screamed. Inside, men shouted in overlapping waves, and through it all, I heard Luca's voice, not loud. Not panic, just absolute. Alive, he ordered. Falco alive. For one wild second, relief was stronger than fear. He came through the side door like judgment in a black coat, flanked by 2 men I barely saw. One of them went down instantly. Luca did not. He moved toward the center of the room with that terrible economy he carried into violence. Each shot deliberate, every step decided. Owen grabbed my hair and dragged me upright in front of him, gun jammed against my temple with his good hand. Back off, he shouted. Luca stopped. The whole room seemed to stop with him. Water dripped somewhere in the dark. My heart beat in my throat. Vittorio watched from behind the column, waiting for the angle that would cost the most. Owen's breath was hot and rotten against my ear. You should have come back when I asked, he hissed. Could've been easy. I closed my eyes once, then opened them and looked at Luca. He was watching Owen's hands. Not the gun, the hands, calculating. There was blood at Luca's side again, old wound reopened. It darkened his shirt beneath the coat. His face was expressionless in that way I had learned meant he was closest to murder. "Let her go," he said. "No, Owen," Vittorio called smoothly from cover. "Don't negotiate above your station." And there it was. The lie-smile voice, the same one Bianca had tried to drag into daylight. Something in me went clear. "Owen," I said softly. He tightened his grip. "Shut up, no. Listen." I looked straight at Luca and spoke loudly enough for the room. Vittorio knew Bianca was pregnant. Silence hit like a physical thing. Even Owen faltered. Luca did not move. Not 1 inch. But the air around him changed so completely, it felt as if the building had opened to winter. Vittorio's voice sharpened. "That isn't relevant. It is if it was Luca's child." Owen's hold slipped by half a fraction. Surprise, confusion. He had not known either. That was enough. I drove my heel down on Owen's foot and threw my head back into his nose. "Bone crunched," he shouted. The gun jerked away. Luca fired once. Owen dropped. Then, Luca crossed the distance between us in what felt like no time at all, catching me by the shoulders and turning me behind him before I could fall. "Are you hit?" "No." He touched my face once, quick, verifying, and then he was gone again. After that, the warehouse became noise and recoil, and men discovering too late who had chosen the wrong side. Paolo appeared from the upper catwalk with a pistol and the fury of an old man done being underestimated. Nico came through the loading bay wearing a bulletproof vest badly with a level of theatrical outrage rarely seen outside opera. "I cannot stress enough," he shouted over the gunfire, "how personally I am taking this week." Vittorio ran for the rear office. Luca followed. I did not. This once, I knew the difference between courage and getting in the way, but I heard enough. The office door slammed, then crashed open again. I reached the threshold in time to see Luca drive Vittorio back against a desk, hard enough to split the lamp. Papers flew, glass shattered. Vittorio struck him with something metal from the desktop. Luca staggered, recovered. Hit back. No elegance left in either of them now. Just blood and history and the terrible intimacy of family violence. "You let me bury her empty," Luca said. Vittorio smiled through split lips. "She chose badly." Luca hit him again. "Did she ask for me?" A strange question in the middle of that room. Vittorio laughed. "She asked whether you would believe me over her." I told her of course you would. Men always do. Luca went white with a kind of rage I had no language for, and then Vittorio smiled before the lie. "I spared you, you know," he murmured. "A woman and a child make weak rulers." That was when Luca would have killed him with his bare hands. I knew it. He knew it. The room knew it. So I said the only thing Bianca had left that still belonged to the living. "Luca." He froze, not because I was stronger, because he was listening. I stepped into the doorway, shaking, filthy, alive. Make him hear her name first. For a second I thought he wouldn't. Then Luca hauled Vittorio upright by the front of his coat and said, voice low enough to sound like a grave opening. "Say her name?" Vittorio smirked bloodily. Why? Luca cocked the gun under his jaw. "Because it is the last clean thing that will pass your mouth." At last, maybe because he believed he could still win, maybe because cruelty was the only prayer he knew, Vittorio said it. "Bianca." Luca pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening in the office. Afterward, all I could hear was my own breathing and the river against the pilings outside. Luca stood very still over the body, then he turned to me. Everything violent in him was still there. And yet when he came to me, his hands were careful, always somehow careful. "I'm here," he said. It took me a second to understand he was answering something older than the warehouse. I nodded. So am I, and for the first time in 3 years I believed it. Chapter 12, the door he closed. The city did not become innocent because one bad man died in a warehouse. It only became rearranged. The drive went where drives like that went when smart people wanted prosecutors ambitious and judges afraid. Anonymous drops, federal desks, quiet panic in expensive offices. Belladonna remained open. 3 councilmen resigned. 2 captains retired unexpectedly. 1 judge developed a sudden devotion to Florida. Massimo Greco's body turned up in the river a week later, courtesy of men Vittorio had planned to betray after using them. Luca said nothing when he heard. Neither did I. Owen survived. That surprised no one and annoyed everyone. Rosa said he would live because the universe enjoyed poor editing choices. Nico visited her at county every day with flowers and once, with a bulletproof vest under his coat, just in case destiny escalated. She told him if he proposed in triage, she would intubate him recreationally. He took that as flirting. I moved back into my apartment only long enough to collect what mattered. 3 succulents. My radio, my grandmother's rolling pin. The red flour tin, empty now except for the recipe cards that had always been mine. Then I left the apartment for good. Not because Luca ordered it. Because the building had learned my fear too well, and I was tired of paying rent to ghosts. He did not ask me to move into his house. That was the first smart thing he did. Instead, 2 months after the warehouse, he took me to a narrow storefront 3 blocks west of Belladonna. Brick front. High windows, bad paint, excellent light. The old tailor downstairs from my apartment had known the owner's cousin, who had known Nico, who had known everybody because tragedy apparently networked aggressively. Luca unlocked the door and stood aside. Inside was an empty bakery space, not beautiful yet, but possible. Stainless counters, deep sink, old tile, enough room for 2 proofing cabinets and a front case if I wanted one. I turned slowly in the middle of it, not trusting the shape of my own hope. What is this? He closed the door behind us. No drafts, no winter air, nothing dying on the counter. Yours, he said. I laughed because there was no other safe response. You can't just give people stores. I can, he said. It's one of my more efficient skills. I looked at him, really looked. The bruises had faded. The wound at his side had healed into a quieter stiffness. Grief still lived in him. It always would. But it no longer looked like the only room in the house. I don't want a gilded cage, I said. His face changed. Only slightly, but enough. This is not a cage. How do I know? He reached into his coat pocket and set a single key on the flour-dusted counter. Then stepped back. You lock it, he said. You open it. You hire who you like. You throw me out if I interfere with fermentation. I stared at the key, then at him. And if I fail, then you fail with good bread. I laughed again, softer this time. He came closer, stopping just inside the distance I had learned he would not cross without permission. Clara, the way he said my name now was nothing like a command. I can protect a street, he said, a building, a route. I cannot decide what makes a life worth staying in. I thought of Bianca in the hospital bathroom, giving a stranger the only thing she had left. I thought of Owen outside windows, of Belladonna's alley. Of Luca stepping from the dark the first night my past reached for me again, and I thought of doors. The ones men kicked in, the ones they refused to close, the ones they held open like fate. I picked up the key. When do I start? The relief that crossed his face was so small, most people would have missed it. Whenever you want. I moved past him toward the back work table, dragged a finger through the dust, and smiled despite myself. There's terrible airflow in here. I'll fix it. No, I said, turning back. You'll pay someone qualified to fix it. I'm trying to keep us both humble. Something warm finally fully reached his mouth, not the ghost of a smile. The real thing, beautiful enough to be dangerous. I crossed the room before I lost courage and caught his tie in my fist. His brows lifted. That, I said, is for calling me Farina in front of armed men for 2 months. And if I do it again, I kissed him before he could finish. This one he took like a starving man who had learned patience and hated the lesson. His hands settled at my waist, firm and certain, but when I leaned closer, he gave ground just enough to prove he still would. When we parted, breathless and ridiculous in an empty bakery, I rested my forehead briefly against his chest. Luca, yes, close the door. His hand slid up my back. It's already closed. Good, I murmured. Then nothing ruins my bread. Outside, the city kept all its old sharp edges. Inside, flour waited. And for the first time in a very long while, so did I.